Failure is a better teacher than success. But to learn, you must be able to dissect the reasons for those failures. If you do not learn from the mistakes of history, you are bound to repeat that history. 1962 and the debacle against China was one of those failures which needed much to be learned from. Now, Galwan was a wake up call for all those who believe that history does not need to be studied, it does not need to be dissected. And to learn about the 1962 China India war and the reasons behind the failure of the Indian polity, the Indian intelligence, and the Indian army, you must be able to know of the reasons. To discuss this, we have with us someone who was there, someone who saw it all. We have with us General Ved Prakash Malik, former Chief of Army Staff. Namaskar, Jai Hind, and welcome to Samvad, sir. The whole conversation started with your post on X, sir, a few days ago, where you posted your photographs from Changla. So who better than you to discuss the issue, because you have been there, you have seen it all in 1962. So to start off with, the first question which I have in mind, we'll get into the details later on, is your personal experience at Changla, the experience behind the photographs you shared on X, because the morale, I believe, was very low at that point in time. And we have heard and read a lot about the challenges thrown up by the terrain, the kind of equipment we had, sir. So I would like to hear from you on this.
Namaskar, Mayank. Yes, I posted those photographs which were taken in 1962 at Shangla. Let me narrate the story. In October 1962, my battalion, which was located in Jammu, was suddenly asked to fly by air to Leh and get deployed near Changla. And so everybody was just put in aircraft. Those days we had Dakotas and all. And we landed, and soon after landing, we were moved to a small base which was below Changla before you started climbing for Changla. I got a few days for acclimatization and with my company. And then I was asked to prepare defenses on both sides of Changla. The situation at that time was that the fighting was going on near Chushul. Many areas north of Pangang So and towards on the northwest side, I'm talking of eastern Ladakh, they had been already captured by the Chinese PLA. And we had a fight in Rizangla in which we had lost almost the whole company of the command. So that was a situation when we were inducted. But then this photograph that you see has been taken after the ceasefire. Okay. And perhaps that is the reason why you find me and my colleagues smiling away, because the tension was not there so much when this photograph was taken. But initially, of course, everybody was tense. And but it doesn't mean that our morale was down. That I can tell you that even as soon as we landed in Leh, almost every company came out with Jaikara, Bole, Sonehal, Sat Sri Akal. And the morale was high. They were prepared to fight. And that was when we landed. But as I said, this photograph you see is post the ceasefire, round about end of November. And that is why you see such broad smiles on our faces. Situation was bad. As I told you, the manner in which we were inducted, we did not have adequate clothing. Our weapons were 303 rifles with limited ammunition. some other weapons like rocket launchers, which had been purchased recently. But when we test fired these weapons, including the rifles, we found that we were not getting the targets as we used to do. The firing the bullets were going high, right, left, and all. So we had to carry out trials. And then we found that because of the rarefied atmosphere, we had to retest all weapons and adjust our sights, etc. Rocket launchers, uh, the fuel was not burning adequately in the rockets. So those are the initial. We had 40-pounder tents, normal tents, which will be about 20 odd kgs, and in which one could just creep into and sleep. And they were the normal canvas tents. We did not have any thing. So there were food was there, but limited quantity. Most of the time, we had to live on tinned rations. So these are the problems that we faced initially when we were deployed in this area. But subsequently, of course, things kept on improving.
The Tibet
terrain, just one mention about terrain. Terrain, you know the area now quite well. Most people know it. Changla is about 15,000 feet, 14 to 15,000 feet high. And the road was a jeepable, broken road kind of a thing. It was a kacha road. And we had a number of cases of pulmonary edema as soon as we landed, within a few days. And the medical facilities were there at Leh, but not adequate really. So the effect of high altitude, being landed in suddenly in those areas and had to run about, all that did create problems for all of us.
Sir, now I'll try to get into a bit of broader details here. 49, the People's Republic of China comes into existence. 1950, they moved to Tibet. Now, till then, Tibet was a buffer between India and China. So strategically, sir, how important was Tibet, both for the Indian army and the PLA, that is the Chinese army?
Look, Tibet was a buffer zone, as you said correctly, between India and China. And while the Chinese accepted it as one of their client state kind of a thing, we had a number of locations in which our troops had been deployed troops along with the diplomats had been deployed in Tibet. But I would say there was total misreading from our political leadership. And I would say strategic naivety, really, not realizing that if the Chinese occupy Tibet, then we will have a common border with each other. And the Chinese were on the rise those days. The PLA was on rise. In 1949, as you said, they became independent. They had thrown out Chiang Kai-shek from that area and other foreign influence. And Mao Zedong, that time, he was a very aggressive leader those days. So I don't think our political leadership, and along with that, I must also mention our diplomats who were there in Beijing, and the the intelligence bureau. I mean, they were totally naive and did not realize the strategic implications of what was happening. Sardar Patel, I must tell you, on 4th November 1950, if I recall, he had written a letter to Pandit Nehru. This is before he died. And very strong-worded letter in which he said that, look, we have to be very careful with the Chinese occupation of Tibet. It has very serious strategic implications. But then that particular letter was ignored. In fact, it was not made public for a very long time. So I would say that total strategic naivety, which caught us on a wrong foot at all.
So did we, I mean, the whole establishment, the political, the diplomats, even the army, I would say, sir, did we actually miss the aggressive intentions of the PLA, Mao Zedong, and Was it possible? Because there are a lot of people who say that the Indian army should have intervened in Tibet when the Chinese came in. Was it possible at that stage of time for the Indian army to intervene militarily in Tibet?
No, Mayank, it was not possible because a few years before that, in fact, our government had been reducing the strength of the army.
Okay.
And, the strength of the army was being reduced, and the complete atmosphere was that, look, why do we need army as such? So the army had no, and similarly, at that time, also the leadership of Menon, Mr. Menon, who was the defense minister. I mean, he was also totally against the army, and he had created all kinds of cliques and all. And the army was being used on non-military tasks like creating barracks for themselves in Ambala, Operation Amar, which was conducted by General B.N. Call. You know, he was a div commander at that time, 4 div commander. Now, these are the kind of non-military tasks in which they were used. So the military, I don't think, was prepared to take on PLA, even if they had been ordered at that time. And as far as the PLA is concerned, PLA was fresh from fighting. They had fought a long battle against Chiang Kai-shek, and they had captured. So their morale was much higher, and they were in a totally different level. So talking about the PLA and the Indian Army, I think it would have been a mismatch, even if the army had been inducted into Tibet.
Sir, I was reading somewhere that Operation Amar, the building of cantonments, was the only activity which General B.M. Call's resume showed when he was elevated to higher positions. But let's move on to different issues. Sir, you have seen those times. And I'll come to the people, how the common people. I mean, how did the people react when, I mean, the Chinese were moving between 50 and 62. I mean, I know it was not the age of information, but something must have been coming out of the parliament, the newspapers. What was the reaction of the people when China moved into Tibet till 1962?
Mayank, let me give you 2 incidents. One was that when this occupation of Tibet by China was taken up in United Nations at the behest of Tibet, of course, Tibet government. I think it was El Salvador government which had taken up this case. You know who opposed it? China and India. And when the PLA was fighting in Tibet, in the area of Shigatse, for example, the rations for the PLA and other requirements, they were sent through India. They landed in Calcutta, and then through Sikkim they were provided. Now that was the kind of political atmosphere at that time. I'm talking about 1950. Now, after that, we kept on, we kept on Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, that atmosphere continued. And it was only when we realized that the Chinese were building that national highway from Tibet to Xinjiang, and which was passing through Aksai Chin area, then people woke up that, look, there is something going wrong here in our territory, because Aksai Chin was considered our territory. And then we started challenging that. But by that time, they were quite aggressive, and they had almost constructed the whole road. So that was a wake-up call, first wake-up call which came to India, and yet we did not prepare ourselves as far as security aspect is concerned. Since then, I mean, I'm talking of after that, there were a number of clashes. Of course, there were talks also going on along with that at diplomatic and the political level. There were a number of clashes. A number of our boys died, Assam Rifles and others. Yet, I don't think we took the Chinese seriously. We never thought that there will be a war. And, the statement made by Pandit Nehru in the parliament, he said, well, they have come to an area where not a blade of grass grows, as if it means nothing at all. So security preparations were never taken throughout the period. even till 62 when the war started off. That I would say that the the security aspect was totally neglected. And then there were people like IB chief Mr. Malik, B.N. Malik, Bengali gentleman. Now, people like them, they said that no, there will be no war. And it's only, I think, in 61 that some preparation started by pushing forward. Now, the first pushing forward was the forward line concept that was created, that we will hold nearly 60 posts all along the border, wherever the Chinese are. But then there was no backup to that. The logistics were not taken into account. And these isolated posts with a platoon or a company, they were strung all along to be able to face the Chinese or the PLA. And yet they had neither communications to them, a proper communication, nor, logistically, it was possible to support them, nor there were any troops to back up in case there is any fight in any of these areas. And that is how the first fight that took place when our troops were deployed along the Namkachu area. And then they were asked to go and capture Thagla Ridge, where the Chinese were present. So that was a kind of a state, and total neglect, I should say, politically, diplomatically, and even militarily.
Sir, even I believe, I was reading somewhere that the Aksai chain road, they started building somewhere in 53, 54, G219.
51.
And
51.
Okay, sir. So, sir, the news filtered into India. I believe some patrols were also sent out, but facts were hidden from the people until the Chinese announced the inauguration of the road. So,
that is right. That is right. And one of our patrol in which we had a number of casualties, in one case, they returned the patrol leader, Karam Singh, I think his name was, and with his people. But in another patrol, they shot down a few of our members of the patrol. You are right. That fact was hidden.
So you spoke of the Namkachu incident when the Indians moved forward and the Chinese counterattacked. Lieutenant General B.M. Kaul was present there when all this happened. Yeah, the 10th of October 1962, 10 days before the actual invasion. And he retreated. He retreated quite hastily. These are on record. So, and since then, it was a rapid retreat and disorganized retreat. So would you say, sir, it's a very sensitive question to ask and maybe answer also, but this disorganized panicky retreat, did the top army leadership actually fail the nation?
Bank, we are talking of 1962, and we have to draw lessons. So I have no hesitation in speaking about anything, what happened at that time. The incident that you had just now mentioned, it was not only B.N. Kaul who had become corps commander by that time, and he was there. Along with him was Niranjan Prasad, who was the GOC of Fort Div, and along with them was Dalvi, Brigadier Dalvi, who was commanding 7th Brigade. And they were all there. And this told the battalion, I think it was a Rajput battalion, you go and capture Dola, along with some other people also from 7th Brigade who were there. And the result was as expected, because they were totally ill-prepared. They had to climb up. Namkachu is at the bottom of Thagla Ridge. Now, they were told to go and capture Thagla Ridge, where the Chinese were sitting prepared. So when that massacre started, General Kaul fell ill, and he came down to Delhi. So for quite some time, he was commanding the corps from Delhi only. Now, you're talking about the leadership. Why very poor leadership? I'm using the word very poor leadership. Is started from the top. Krishna Menon was not the right kind of a people who would command or who would be able to look after the military. He had created all kinds of cliques. and beside his own thinking about the geopolitical affairs, but within the army, he had created all kinds of cliques. He would not listen to some sane voices of, say, General Thorat or General Timaya himself, who was the chief that time. And they wanted a proper defensive line, but he did not listen. And he was only listening to Kaul, who was a favorite of Pandit Nehru. And so that was the main issue there. But then it was not limited to that. These cliques, he started damaging the people who were upright at that time. And there were inquiries started off. There was an inquiry against Field Marshal, that time General Manekshaw, who was Commandant Staff College. All kinds of things were happening. So the morale of the hierarchy, right from the top to bottom, was very poor. But the problem was, anybody who spoke out, there was vindictive action taken against them. That was the kind of atmosphere. The morale was low amongst all officers from top to bottom. They had lost interest, but they were just following orders which were given to them. And that is why, when General Kaul told the battalion, the 7th Brigade and their battalion to capture Thagla, nobody protested. General Rajan Prasad, who was GOC 4 Div, he also did not protest. So it was poor handling of the situation. And you are right, the army was not in a good state at all. Morale was low amongst the, right from, as I said, senior officers to junior officers. And people on the ground were totally unconvinced as to the kind of tasks which were being given to them. And that is how it is being described by Brigadier Dalvi. Also, you would have read his book, Dalvi's book of the happenings of those days in this area of Namkachu battle.
But Krishna Menon is Defence Minister. He had a running battle with you yourself said, with the entire military leadership, the upright military leadership. And
right.
Particularly with General Thimaiya. He had this running feud sort of a thing with General Thimaiya. So I would like to understand any instance, it's not Krishna Menon, any time it happens, sir, what is the effect on the morale and the operational capabilities of the army if the defense minister is having a feud with the COS? Because I read somewhere, sir, I am quoting from Shiv Kunal Verma's book, 1962, The War That Wasn't. He says that General Thimaiya, while he was retiring in 1961, he was visiting the field formations. So at one of the places he said, and I'm quoting him, "I hope I'm not leaving you as canned fodder for the Chinese," unquote. This is to the troops. What did he mean by this?
Mayank, as I mentioned to you earlier, that General Thimaiya and General Thorat, they were more practical people, but then their advice of fighting in an area along the defensive line, as they called it, that was not accepted, and that was totally rejected. Not only that, Mr. Menon's relations with the chief kept on deteriorating because he would not listen to him. He would listen people like Biji Kaul. And after some time, Thimaiya also lost interest. If you recall, there was this incident when at one stage he wanted to resign, but then he was persuaded by Pandit Nehru to carry on. But he had lost interest. And that was a sad state of affairs when you have such major differences with your defense minister, who's the boss. It is better to resign. Unfortunately, that did not happen. And when you have that kind of disinterested army chief and his other colleagues, what do you expect? So that will affect the morale of the entire army. It is a very unfortunate thing. I mean, one of them must leave. Either the defense minister should leave or the chief leave. Now, not having this kind of misunderstanding and going on for years, that is sad for the army. So I hope that kind of a situation never occurs again. You have to have confidence in each other, no? After all, army is an instrument of the political leadership. And if there is no trust and there is no faith in each other, how can you run a big army like ours?
Sir, this was one of the most unfortunate events, I would say, in the history of the Indian Army for a very long time. I read somewhere that Namkachu incident, when General Kaul was retreating, Brigadier Dal, the troops on the ground were asking for artillery support, and Brigadier Dalvi couldn't give it because
It was
General
not
Kaul
there.
was in the ranges, could have been in the ranges of the PLA. So the troops were sacrificed for this ignominious retreat. Sir, one final
No,
question.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that aspect. But the fact is that we did not have adequate artillery. We did not have adequate ammunition. So, when you have these small posts strung along, trying to defend a small bridge over Namkachu, there were many of these posts were there to protect the bridge, which was a footbridge really. That kind of a deployment, and nobody could challenge that because those had been approved at the level of the corps commander. Now that was a very unfortunate situation. And because of inadequacy of weapons and ammunition and equipment, and people were unfortunately left to themselves to fight for themselves. And the Chinese, on the other hand, the PLA was much better prepared. There's another aspect that I want to mention here. The Air Force was not used. Why? Because the Americans, as well as our own intelligence bureau chief, they felt that if we use the Air Force, it will escalate the whole situation and we will not be able to defend our cities and all. And at that time, the PLA Air Force was not strong enough. We could have made use of our own Air Force, but it was not used. So this is the kind of misunderstanding that we had between the military and the political leadership and the intelligence bureau. Now, somehow the political leadership depended more on the intelligence bureau chief. His name was also Malik, as I said. And also people like Biji Kaul, and did not pay attention to the others who had seen, who had more practical experience on the ground.
The heartening aspect, according to me, was that the middle and the junior officers led their troops to the best of their abilities, sir.
Yeah,
but goes on to show that if the top leadership is not up to the mark, the army suffers. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, you are right. Absolutely. The pride in the regiment, the pride in the battalion, now that was strong even at that time, despite all the difficulties and challenges. And that kind of a situation continues even today. I must tell you that people have a lot of pride in their battalion and in their regiments. And so that was the plus point at that time. And that is why so many people, I think nearly about 4,000 people died during that war.
Yes, sir.
And many of them, despite the shortage of weapons or ammunition and not having any other facilities to be able to fight better, they were sacrificed at that time.
Sir, one final question, sir. Are we better prepared now? I hope it does not come to that. I hope it does not come to that.
No, we are much better prepared. There is absolutely no doubt about it. And I always say that, look, let the Chinese not think that we are in a 62 era. We are not. There has been, first and foremost, there has been considerable improvement in our communications and the infrastructure that is required on the border. So that has been going on continuously now for quite some time in all sectors, the eastern sector, the middle sector as well as on the western sector. Communications have improved. We have got much better weapon system. Of course, we have also raised a large number of units and formations, and weapons are also being, so this modernization is going on. And with the kind of modernization that is taking place, much better surveillance devices. The only, sometimes I feel is that I wish we had better intelligence on the other side. Not just technical, but even human int, as we call it. But otherwise, we are much better prepared. And also good to see that the political leadership is also today more practical and not prepared to take any nonsense from the other side, because we are strong enough now. And they're prepared to give it back if something untoward happens. So that kind of strategic thinking is definitely a plus point, which is there today.
I would like to conclude on that note, sir. Thank you so much for sparing time for us, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
It was always nice speaking with you. Thank you.
Sir. Thank you, sir.